Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North Week number 5 overview and analysis video in the spring split. If you can't tell, a little bit of an audio difference. I have moved into my new apartment. We are finally, really wrapping up with a lot of the moving process. Most of the stuff is now in the new place, and so we are going to be filming from here on out. Hopefully this is a better listening experience in terms of the audio. I don't have to be quite as loud because I'm in a room now. I actually have like a closed off room with 4 walls around me, which is really nice, as before, I just had this giant empty dining room that I was recording in, so hopefully this is going to be a little bit better in terms of the audio quality, but I'm excited to go over everything here today in the LTA North. Again, we're getting kind of really close to the end of the regular season. After this, there's only technically 1 week left of the regular season. We get that kind of last chance qualifier at the end, week number 7, but we're going to see some teams locking their spots in for the playoffs here today. If you are excited, let me know down in the comment section below. What did you expect to happen in the series here today or these past couple days? And, did they live up to your expectations? Who's over or underperforming your, initial expectations? Genuinely curious to know whether or not you guys are surprised with the way things are going. But let's get into the content. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover. And at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will, of course, be updating my power rankings from number 1 to number 8 at the end of the video, but I'm not going to spoil too much. Not really a lot of changes to be made here. A lot of teams kind of playing as expected in week number 5. So without further ado, let's get into day number 1. Remember, every single team only plays one best of 3 over the course of each week as we get into these best of 3 stages. So every single game really counts for these teams. And starting off on day number 1 was a matchup between FlyQuest and Shopify Rebellion. That FlyQuest is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 series win in. Shopify is going to be able to pick up the game 2 win, which I think overall is a really big positive for them. This team actually looked okay for a good portion of this series. Again, game 2 looked really nice. I think the top side of the map was really active and was honestly a big plus for Shopify, which has certainly not always been the case, but Fly was way better when it really mattered in that third game, and I think they ended up really being able to carry a lot of that momentum over the finish line. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Busio in the support position. He's mostly getting this for the Janna in game number 3. Janna is a pick that I really like. I've been pushing the Enchanter train for quite a while now. I truly believe that one of the only reasons we primarily get engaged supports is because that's just what supports want to play and not because they're the best in the game. Now, I think teams absolutely need consistent forms of engage, and oftentimes you're just assigning that role to support, but you can get that elsewhere in certain comps, and you certainly have it here on Fly with Renekton potentially diving a backline, Nocturne and Orianna being able to combo up. Janna is super valuable. Soraka is super valuable. Lulu is super valuable. A lot of the picks that fit into this little niche, I think, are very good, and you know what? Busio piloted it very well. This Janna was basically unstoppable. A lot of people are going to give player of the series to Masu. I believe that's what Broadcast ended up doing here. But to me, it's much clearer that Busio was the bigger impact in game number 3. And I think even when you look throughout the rest of the series, he was excellent. I'm going to say something that I think is definitely a little bit controversial, but has Busio been the most valuable member of FlyQuest in 2025? I certainly think there is an argument to be made in that favor for Busio. He's been excellent, especially over the past few weeks. He's kind of breaking the mold of what I called him at the beginning of the year. I said that he was a B+ player, somebody that was, really good, always going to be consistently one of the best supports, but maybe not ever the best support in the region. He's playing like the best support in the region, right up there with Vulcan and Core JJ right now. So credit to Busio. Excited to see that. He's maybe the most informed player on the best team in the league. Masu, of course, does deserve a lot of credit. He was the hyper carry in game number 3, and he did get really fed on the Jinx to be able to take over in those team fights. He was excellent on the Corki in game number 1. If you wanted to give player of the series to him, I'm certainly not going to budge in that regard. Quad and Inspired were also better than their counterparts. Maybe not by a ton in Inspired's case. I still think he was very good, but Quad definitely outplayed Palafox. The only real concern is that Bwipo had a stinker of a series. He pulls out the Nidalee Top in game number 1. Anybody who watches my LCK or LPL coverage knows how I feel about Nidalee Top. I hate that pick, and I think it's very overplayed. Bwipo ends up making it look pretty bad here, and then the Yorick also looks pretty terrible in game number 2. I'm not saying he solo lost that game, but Fudge much gapped him in this series for the most part. He turned things on in game number 3 when it mattered the most, but certainly not the cleanest series of all time from Whippo. That being said, more than enough power coming in from the bottom side of the map to be able to get FlyQuest over the hump. And then for Shopify on the other side, this team just doesn't have a complete package no matter what ends up happening. Shout out Fudge. He was easily the best player on the team. You know, we talk all the time about Fudge not having that confidence, not being super consistent in terms of what he's putting out. He's really not been good over the course of this year, but this was one of those performances that I think you're just like, okay, it's still there. Like, he still is talented enough to be able to make a difference here. It's just not going to be consistent. Contracts also, I think, was fine overall. I think the scoreline definitely makes him look a little bit worse than maybe what he actually was, but overall, I would definitely say that he was all right. The other player I considered for dud of the series that isn't Palafox, who does end up getting it, by the way, was Seos in the support position. He can only play engagers. That's always been the case, even going back to his time in the CB LOL, and it's really kind of coming back to bite him here. They R5 the Rel in game number 3 into the Janna, and it's just completely useless. There's no way for Rel to be able to play that game out. It's like they chose that they needed engage coming out of the support position, and Rel was the best available, and they said, screw it, it doesn't really matter that this champion is getting hard countered on the other side of this matchup. We have to go for it anyways because of the way we constructed things. I don't think that's necessarily ideal. Shen jungle, by the way, also in game number 3, River Shen, if you will. Kind of interesting, but didn't end up working out. And then, like I said, dud of the series is going to go to Palafox. This guy is just not good right now. There are multiple mid laners in the NACL that I think would be upgrades. We've seen the seal broken. Yuji was picked up, of course, by Team Liquid. We'll talk about that a bit more when we get into TL series later on in the week, but clearly there are some opportunities for players to come in and, take some spots. If Spyrax is a player that could theoretically be available, I would love to go and grab him. I'm not even sure Dragonsteel would love to give him up. Dark Zero is absolutely cruising right now in the NACL. There's a real shot that they want to get promoted going into the LTA next year, and so maybe they want to keep somebody like Spyrax, but they already have Toasty Alex. Who knows, right? But all I'm saying is Palafox just isn't that guy anymore, and I think that's become abundantly clear. But for Shopify, they just don't have the firepower to compete with FlyQuest. They're really not that bad of a team. I think they looked better in this series than they have in recent weeks, but it's not consistent. And then for Fly on the other side, like I said, Masu and Busio definitely the carries here, and especially with Masu not really being the most dominant player across this year so far, that's a really good sign. Quad continues to be one of the best mid laners. If Whippo can just lock in, or if Gakgos can come in and actually be really good on the top side for this team in a 6-man rotation, I think Fly is still going to be the best team in the league. Then moving on to our second series here of day number 1. And again, predictable outcome, dominant games. It's Team Liquid taking on Disguised. And Team Liquid is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. They're not going to drop anything here. And this was anticipated. As much as Team Liquid has been struggling in recent weeks, in my opinion, to find that level of consistency that maybe they're looking for, this is a super easy win for them over the worst team in the LTA North. Of course, credit to Disguised for, still kind of putting it on out there and, trying their best, but they are not on the level of a lot of these other LTA teams, and I think it's pretty clear to me that they are bottom 1 right now. They kind of proved that once again in this series, but we'll go ahead and kind of give a detailed breakdown. Not really a lot to discuss in terms of how this series went because everything was just a little bit more obvious in terms of the outcome, and it was very dominant, so we'll go ahead and get into it. There are some takeaways. First and foremost, we gotta talk about because he's gonna get my player of the series once again, second series in a row where the AD carry ends up getting over 20 kills across, multiple games, and I'm not giving them player of the series, except this time you've got Core JJ at 4-0 and 38. You've got Impact at 8-1 and 23, and yet somehow, some way I'm giving it to I think anybody who watched game number 2 on the Xinjiao would understand exactly, why I'm doing this. I know there's been some reported wrist problems going for They're not showing on tape right now. This is the best he has ever played in the history of his entire career, and I feel pretty confident in saying that. He's been super fun to watch. XU had no chance to be able to go up against him and actually be able to compete at any sort of respectable level. And honestly, I'm going to make a bold statement here. I don't know how common this is going to be as we get further along into the regular season, but if we're doing end of split awards, is the favorite to win MVP right now? I certainly think he's within the running, right? I don't know if there's anybody else that has mattered to their team as much as has. I've thrown the name Loki out there in the past. I think someone like Busio has made a conversation for himself, but I don't think there's a runaway candidate for MVP right now in North America like there is in a lot of the other regions, and has been on fire across the spring split, certainly the best player on Team Liquid, and so, I'm throwing his name in there. If you ask me right now who's the MVP of the spring split here in the LTA North, I probably would answer probably would be my first place vote. We'll see how things end up finishing off, but the regular season's almost done here, and he really has been fantastic. But how do you not talk about the bot lane here as well? LYON and Core JJ, they haven't been quite as dominant this split as they have been in the past. Obviously we talk about the 2v2 dominance performance of LYON as a player. And, Core's really stepped into that role well, especially at the start of 2025. But this was kind of classic LYON and Core, where they're just able to get super fed in the early game and snowball the game entirely out of control. Core was unbelievable as a setup man, and LYON was fantastic being able to follow through and involve himself in basically everything that's happening on the map. He was just as involved as anybody, and that's really important in my opinion for the AD carry role. It's something I really look for out of marksman players. It's really nice to see Impact win a top lane matchup. This has not been something that's happened all that frequently. You would be surprised by how Impact has performed over the course of this year, but to see him go up against Castle, who, yes, is really declining in terms of his play. He's not even half the player he was in the winter split at the beginning of the year. To see him go up against that guy and crush him is still a really good sign. The Rumble game in game number 2 was really encouraging because he's not really been able to play a lot of carries across this year and even look remotely average. So nice look from him. APA was solid. Really no negatives to throw at Team Liquid. Everything kind of going right for them, and Umti in particular really feeling like a carry out of the jungle right now, and somebody who's really stepping up when it matters a lot for TL to be able to stabilize. And then for Disguised on the other side, they're just bad in every position, maybe with the exception of AD Carry, where Scary Jerry has definitely gotten at least a little bit more comfortable, but this was not a good series from him. It's not like he didn't get mega outplayed by LYON on the other side of this. It didn't really feel close at any point, but the notable matchups where players just got completely destroyed were top and jungle. In my opinion, Castle is going to get dud of the series. When you go 0-14-2, you're a pretty leading candidate to get that dud of the series. When you do that against a player in Impact who has been free-falling, actually spiraling in terms of his production over the past couple of weeks, that is even worse in my opinion. So this felt like a no-brainer. Castle was incredible for this team in the winter split, the only player at least even attempting to try and win games for them, and he has fallen off of a cliff in spring so far. Genuinely been one of the worst players in the LTA. XU is not, a tier 1 caliber jungler in the way that he plays right now. I know I've talked about some playstyle problems for him where he does rely a lot on winning lanes, and this is a team with no winning lanes, which certainly makes things a lot more difficult for him. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to, step up and, make plays yourself. And he has been out-tempoed in almost every single game that they have played. So I'm pretty out on XU in terms of the performances we've seen this year. Abadaga, I've gone on a lot of rants on not being particularly into his gameplay. I think he's been the most detrimental player in North America, who he had a really bad series on the Alistair and the Leona, with Core being so aggressive and LYON being able to capitalize. And, Scary Jerry had one of his weaker series in a while as well. It's just not going well for Disguise. Nothing is going right. And again, they have to fight to try and keep this guest spot going into next year. They're going to have a chance to retool and hopefully get better going into the summer split, but they need to do that because right now, I don't even know if they would be a top 3 NACL team in terms of how they're playing. And then for Team Liquid on the other side, hopefully this team can get back to, defending champion form, because they are the defending champions. I know people forgot they ended up going to first stand, or maybe they didn't because they remember them being the first team eliminated from that tournament. But this is the team that was supposed to be the team to beat here in North America. These are the players that had stepped up previously. To see Umti in such good form and LYON and Core hopefully getting back to where they should be, that makes Team Liquid still a top tier threat, even if they're not particularly consistent. Then moving on to day number 2 now, the second half of our week, and we kicked off day number 2 with a matchup between 100 Thieves and Dignitas, where 100 Thieves are going to be able to pick up the 2-0. You might look at this and say, oh, they didn't drop a game, maybe it was clean. Anybody who watched this knows that that was very much not the case. This was a very messy, very chaotic back and forth series. Both games 1 and 2 were just kind of insane, very, very weird to talk about, but 100 Thieves is the team that is going to come out on top in this one. They're better, and this is kind of the scrim 100 Thieves that we had heard about, where they're just constantly taking every single fight and trying to, take everything on the map, even if they don't necessarily have perfect setups for it. Dignitas just don't really have the firepower to be able to actually deal with that. We moved them up to number 6 after they had been bottom 2 in my power rankings the entirety of the split up until this point. It's nice to see that they have kept up, some of their more interesting pace, but certainly not consistent between the two games who to talk about in a positive light. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Ayla. In the support position, Nautilus and Leona as primary engage options really changed how Dignitas had to look at this series. I think Leona's underplayed right now. If you're going to be playing a lot of Rel, Alistair, and Nautilus, why not play Leona? It just feels very strange that she's the one that's kind of the odd man out. I think that the buffs they gave her, 4 months ago, have really ended up making her pretty valuable once again, and so I believe the champ is in a good spot, and Ayla proved that in game number 2, was still super valuable in game number 1 as primary setup. Overall, I just think it was a good look from Ayla and from 100 Thieves. He's not been in the best form as of late, and so it is, again, nice to see him get back there. FBI is kind of a similar story. FBI has not exactly been killing it so far in the spring split, especially coming off of that winter split, where he was arguably the best AD carry in terms of production in the entire league. He definitely did not follow that up by dominating in spring. I am a big FBI fan, but this is much more of what I expected. Coming over to 100 Thieves, where he's a good, not great AD carry. He's very good at playing strong side if he needs to be able to do that, but there are better strong side players on this team, more notably Quid, obviously, in the mid lane, the main character for 100 Thieves, and then Sniper, I think, has gotten better playing strong side on the top side, so FBI and Ayla have just inherently taken more of a step back in terms of the priority here. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's nice to see that they can still have some good series and good games if they can get it. Sniper has been on fire as of late. I don't think he was perfect in game number 2, but he certainly was pretty darn good. We're going to talk about, Surdy on the other side of this. It was a tale of 2 games between game 1 and game 2, but at the end of the day, Sniper was probably more consistent and certainly was a little bit better than Surdy, and he's been a lot better as of late. I've been very anti-Sniper on this channel. I'm turning that around. He's been very good in the spring split. Quid and River were totally fine. They're usually the main characters here, but they didn't have to be in this series. Overall, it's fine for 100 Thieves. Maybe you want to see them be a bit cleaner, especially around a lot of these Baron setups, but, picking up the win, that's what really matters at the end of the day, and that's what they were capable of doing. And then for Dig on the other side, they don't have the mechanics to compete with 100 Thieves, so when you get to these later game team fights where things are actually kind of neutral in terms of gold, and you've got a lot of gold specifically on players like Kana in game number 1 or Surdy in game number 2, you can theoretically fight, but you can't practically fight because you're not in a situation where you are as good neutrally as 100 Thieves is, and that's kind of what we saw. We saw a lot of really weird Baron setups and really bad throws in the back half of these games. Kana is going to get my dud of the series for that Jace game in game number 2. The Ahri game was pretty good in game number 1, but I kind of oscillated here between the 2 solo laners. Kana's going to get it because he was worse in the decider in game number 2, but Surdy was awful in game number 1. I think that was probably the worst game of the series, and so whoever you want to give it to, I think is up to you. I just think Surdy was too valuable in that second game, certainly the player that was trying his best, but man, he was getting run over in game 1 on that Renekton. He was down like 80 CS and was just not useful in any capability. There was a moment where River took his corpse as Viego and just instantly had to get rid of it because he couldn't do anything on the Renekton. It was very funny to watch in terms of how that game played out. But Tomo and Isles also kind of getting outplayed. Isles was actually fine in this series. Shaden was also kind of fine, and Shaden's the best player on this team. That's become clear. But Tomo, I think, has really started to lose a lot of the pressure that he was able to generate, not only this year, but last year when he was on both Dignitas and 100 Thieves in the LTA North. Overall, he's not been able to keep that form up. So for Dig, I mean, again, it's kind of who they are. I'm glad that they were able to keep things interesting. Shaden's a good skirmisher. Surdy had a couple of nice moments. Kana had a couple of nice moments. I think Isles overall was fine in this series. Dignitas had a couple of nice, takeaways here. They just couldn't find any sort of consistency, and they certainly aren't good enough to actually be able to go up against 100 Thieves, and that's a credit to 100 Thieves and how they play out a lot of their team fights. Is this team perfect? Absolutely not. I really have wanted to put them at number 4 in my power rankings for many weeks now, but I've just been a little bit scared to do so because it feels like they're just going to get top 3, like no matter what. I just don't know who that number 4 team is going to be right now, and so they've stuck at number 3. This is a good performance, but certainly not one that justifies being above a team like Team Liquid, so we'll see what happens at the end of the week in terms of the power rankings. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in the LTA North in week number 5, and it was a really good one to end the week off. It was Cloud9 taking on LYON, and Cloud9 is going to pick up the 2-1 series win, but oh my goodness. If you haven't seen this series, please go and watch these games, specifically game number 2 that Cloud9 is able to win, but even game number 3 as well. Absolute fiestas. The fact that LYON lost this series is absolutely unbelievable. There is no reason for them to have lost that second game. It felt like they were in full control of it and they just threw it away at the end because they don't know how to close. They're not a team that has the capability to compete near the top of the standings with their decision making, and it really just kind of came down to that. And Cloud9, to their credit, capitalized on the mistakes that LYON made, but it's not like Cloud9 looked particularly good for a majority of this series. There were multiple players that I could point out being quite bad overall for C9, most notably Loki in the mid lane, who just was not very good in this series. We'll talk about that as we continue to go along, but player of the series is once again going to go against the grain for me. It's going to go to Vulcan in the support position, kind of the weak of supports in terms of player of the series outside of Umpty on Team Liquid, but Vulcan, I've kind of gone to bat for a ton on this channel. I've said that he's the best support in North America for quite a long time. I said that going into the year. I said that last year. In terms of the production he's putting out, I think people are starting to wake up to just how good he actually has been recently, because he's able to do so much as a dissuader in terms of engages when it comes to Lions or when it comes to OD-LAN on the other side, but he's also a great engage threat himself if you want to open things up on things like the Alistair. His Poppy play in game number 2 won them that game. I mean, genuinely, I really do believe when you go and watch that game number 2, it might not be the flashiest gameplay you've ever seen, but without Vulcan there, or without one of the best supports in the West there, I don't think you actually go out and win that. So big ups to Vulcan. Like, obviously, tons of credit to him. I do want to point out Sven as well. He's been awesome for this team, super consistent as a carry. Maybe he didn't have a ton of pop-off moments here, but his team fighting still is phenomenal. I got a comment last week on the LTA North video that Sven is super underrated and that I'm not talking about him enough, and that's really cool to hear because, I kind of have talked about Sven too much over the past couple of years, and so to hear that now it's kind of swung in the other direction, it means I can talk about him more, but Sven has been excellent, probably the best performing AD carry in the entire league. LYON, obviously, has been fantastic, but not necessarily been the main character of Team Liquid. And I think, Masu's getting into form, but he wasn't really in that at the beginning of the split. Sven has definitely been the guy in the AD carry role so far in spring, which is awesome. This has been arguably the best bot lane in North America, which I just don't think a lot of people expected, maybe with the exception of me, right? I was hyping them up a ton in terms of their synergy going into the offseason, and I think they've paid that out. Thanatos ends up getting player of the series entirely for the Camille game in game number 3. Credit to Thanatos, he absolutely obliterated Licorice in that third and final game, but I just can't look past game 1 and game 2 on the Mbessa and the Gnar. A couple of big moments on the Gnar at the end of game number 2, but the consistency, especially in lane, just was not very good at all from Thanatos, and that's kind of his big selling point. So he's not player of the series for me. I already talked about it, but Blabber and Loki had their own individual problems here. Blabber's going to get a bit more hate than maybe he deserves, but Loki was genuinely bad for a majority of this series. He's been pretty great for Cloud9 in the spring split. This was not a series to really kind of push that narrative forward, if you will. So Cloud9's going to be happy they picked up the victory, but still a lot to work on, and this team's floor is still pretty low. You're certainly not looking at anything too bad for Cloud9. Like, at the end of the day, they're still winning the series, but you got to see a little bit more consistency. This is a team that's been trying to find that for the past year and a half, really, and, it kind of felt like they were getting there, the last couple of weeks. This week definitely kind of took more of a negative turn in that direction, but I still think it's possible for them to get that back. And then for LYON on the other side, they tried their absolute best to pull off a massive upset here, and if they were a little bit more clinical, I do think it ends up happening, but you can give a lot of props to basically everybody on this team. I'm going to get the negative out of the way first. Saint is going to get my dud of the series here. He throws away game number 2 on the Sylas. If he just doesn't go in with that second E on Sylas in that fight, I actually think they maybe just win the game straight up. It's absurd the fact that they actually went and did that. Completely unacceptable in my opinion from Saint, a player of his caliber and a player that has this much responsibility on the team. It's really not something that can happen. He was very bad on the Victor in game number 3 as well. Just, major mistakes that end up really costing his team. I think you could say similar things about Licorice, who got absolutely abused in game number 3. We talked about Thanatos playing really well in that third and final game. Licorice was on the negative receiving end of that, but I think Licorice was fine in the first couple of games, and I think he was valuable for the most part in this series to LYON. Everybody else actually was pretty good. OD-LAN had a great series. I think Henna did a good job of capitalizing on the things set up for him. Lions was pretty great as an engage threat, and I really liked the way he played Braum in game number 1. LYON had a lot of positive things going for them. They just didn't quite have enough to be able to overcome Cloud9, who was just a little bit too much for them. Again, I like where LYON is at. They are clearly, in my opinion, the best of the rest right now. If any of the bottom 4 teams are going to be able to compete at the upper part of the standings, it will be LYON. I just don't think that any of them are going to be able to do it because Cloud9 basically gave LYON an opportunity to win this series and they still couldn't go out and take it. And so it kind of is what it is. But for Cloud9 on the other side, you would love to see a little bit of a better performance and maybe something a little bit more consistent. But, can we really complain about getting such a banger here in the LTA? At the end of the day, they still ended up winning it. Doesn't matter if you win 2-1 clean or 2-1 unclean on your record, it's going to look all the same. And so Cloud9's going to be excited about that, but at least they gave us some really fun games to go with it. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LTA North week number 5 overview and analysis video here in the spring. Split up on the screen the updated groups standings after the first 2 weeks of groups here, and we already have some things that are determined. You can see with the green border around them, Team Liquid and Cloud9 have both officially qualified for playoffs. They are guaranteed to be top 2 in their group. As you can see, they both went 2-0. LYON and Disguised are both 0-2. That means regardless of what happens on the final day, regardless of who ends up winning that match matchup between them, they will both be going to playoffs. Now, what order they're going in is still to be determined based on, of course, how that ends up happening. Just as a reminder, in terms of the format here, we're going to have the final, like, in-group week next week, week number 3 of the group stage, and then that final week, that week number 7, if you will, is going to be the qualification matchups. So the top 2 teams from each group will face off against each other to see who the number 1 seed will be going into playoffs. The loser will be the number 2 seed. Same thing for the teams that get second, who will play for the 3rd seed, and then the loser will get the 4th seed. And then obviously we have some matchups in the bottom of the standings. 3rd will take on 4th from the other group, and the winner of that series goes on to the playoffs. And so that's kind of the format. Just as a reminder, Team Liquid and Cloud9 guaranteed for playoffs. LYON and Disguise guaranteed to have, at the very least, have to play a best of in order to get in to the playoffs. For Group B, though, it's a little bit more open-ended in terms of how things have landed. Nobody is technically qualified yet. FlyQuest is about as close as you can possibly get, but theoretically, if Fly end up losing to Dignitas next week and 100 Thieves end up beating Shopify, there is a world where if they don't pick up a game, that 100 Thieves and Dignitas could be the 2 teams to qualify out of this group. That's obviously, not particularly expected, but that's kind of what we're looking at there. You can also see my power rankings in a little bit of small text to the right of every single team. The only change I will talk about is Team Liquid is going to jump 100 Thieves for that number 3 spot. I just feel better about Team Liquid. I certainly think they are a more talented team. I just worry about the consistency of a team like Team Liquid, and it feels like 100 Thieves is destined to get 3rd. I don't know who's going to get 4th, but it feels like one of those top 3 teams is going to underperform. I'm just not going to throw my lot in there on who it's going to be just yet. 100 Thieves are clearly the 4th best team in the LTA at the moment, so they move there, but no other changes in terms of my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with on that front in the comment section below, but let's go ahead and get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 5. Player of the week was pretty easy for me. It's going to go to the jungler for Team Liquid. Like I said, in the Team Liquid section, he is my favorite right now for MVP, which is really funny because they just brought Yuji on from Dragonsteel from Maryville University to kind of be this 6th man for the team, but is playing the best league he maybe ever has in his entire career. He's been lighting things up here in the spring split as a primary carry option for Team Liquid, and I'm really excited for it. We'll see what ends up happening with that team down the road. Definitely worth noting that this is back-to-back weeks where whichever team ends up playing Disguised ends up getting a player of the week on the board. Thanatos last week and this week, but I definitely think deserved it, more specifically for that Xin Zhao game in game number 2. But my honorable mentions, Busio, the support for FlyQuest. I think he's been fantastic, very quietly one of the best players in the LTA. And then Vulcan, he's been a lot more bombastic about how good he's been. I think he's very loudly been one of the best players in the LTA, but both of those supports definitely deserve a shout out here. And then dud of the week for me is going to go to Castle, the top laner for Disguised. He just got absolutely obliterated by Impact. It was not even remotely close. You could even theoretically give this to his teammate XU. I think he was in the running in the conversation for this award, but Castle to me was definitely the worst player in the league this week. I didn't have to think too much about it. The second time he's gotten it already in spring. What a downturn from his performances, even on Immortals last year, but especially from what he was in the winter split. It's just disappointing. So Castle's my dud of the week, and is my player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're covering everything else with the LTA North for the rest of the year, the rest of the regular season, the playoffs, all of that good stuff, but we're also covering all 3 of the other major regions, so LEC, LCK, and LPL. Every single week on this channel, we also cover the NACL Tier 2 here in North America, so if you want to see the next big up-and-comers or a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.